Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my 2024 college football predictions. So, we're going to be going through all Power 5 conferences plus Notre Dame, and I'm going to be previewing the season for every team, giving my record prediction, and then finally going over my college football playoff picks. But beginning my predictions in the ACC, 17th or last in the ACC, I have Stanford. So, Stanford enters their first season in the ACC, and it comes when this Stanford program is going through some rough times. They haven't won more than 4 games since 2018, and I think that trend will continue. Offensively, Stanford returns quarterback Ashton Daniels, but behind him is 4-star true freshman Elijah Brown. Then at receiver, Stanford has one of the better receivers in the country, in Alec Eilmanor. I probably said that wrong, as he had over 1,000 yards last season. Now, the offensive line is not good for Stanford, and neither is the defense. In fact, the defense was brutal last season, giving up 38 points a game. But the defense does return 7 starters, and could show some improvement. I could see Stanford winning a few games, but I think this will be a tough season for Stanford. I have them going 3-9, 1-7 in the ACC. Wins over Cal Poly, Wake Forest, and San Jose State. 16th in the ACC, we have Virginia. So Virginia is another team that probably isn't going to be too good. They've only won 3 games in each of the past 2 seasons, and I'm expecting a similar win total again this season. Offensively, they have a quarterback battle between Tony Muskett and Anthony Colandrea. Now, Virginia lost go-to wide receiver Malik Washington to the NFL, so that leaves a huge hole at the receiver position, as Washington was a huge part of their offense with over 110 catches for over 1,400 yards last season. Now, the Virginia run game was bad last season, and I don't expect there to be significant improvement there. And the defense, same story. Pretty bad last year, not expecting much improvement. I have Virginia finishing with the same win total as the past 2 seasons. I have them going 3-9, 1-7 in the ACC, wins over Coastal Carolina, Richmond, and Boston College. 15th in the ACC, we have Pitt. So Pitt is coming off a bad 3-9 season, which is their first losing season since 2017, and it's their lowest win total since 1998. But Pitt is going to have another bad season. The offense has some major questions, especially at the quarterback position, as they have an ongoing quarterback battle between Nate Yarnell, an Alabama transfer, and former 4-star quarterback Eli Holstein. Now, outside the quarterback position, the offense was really bad last year, but there could be some improvement there. Leading rusher Rodney Hammond is back, and their second leading receiver, Kotana Mumfield, also returns. Defensively, Pitt was quite bad last year, and they already actually have some injuries, such as players who are out for the year, and players who just don't return. This is going to be a pretty bad defense for Pitt, and a bad team overall. Pitt's going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC. I have them going 4-8, 1-7 in the ACC. Wins over Kent State, Cincinnati, Youngstown State, and Virginia. 14th, we have Duke. So I expect Duke to take a significant step back after they went a respectable 8-5 last season. But they lost head coach Mike Elko, as he's now at Texas A&M, and they just lost a ton of production from last season's team. Starting quarterback Riley Leonard transferred to Notre Dame. Leading rusher Jordan Waters also transferred, and their second leading receiver Jalen Calhoun is now in the NFL. Plus, several defensive contributors are no longer with the team. But offensively for Duke, they brought in Texas transfer Malik Murphy at quarterback, and he's a great dual threat quarterback, so I'm excited to see what he can do now as the starter. And while Duke lost some playmakers, they still have some players that are good and good players around Malik Murphy, as their second leading rusher Jaquez Moore and their leading receiver Jordan Moore are both back. Now, the offensive line won't be very good for Duke, and the defense returns just 3 starters, but I think this will be a pretty tough season for Duke in year 1 under Manny Diaz. I have been going 4-8, 1-7 in the ACC. Wins over Elon, UConn, Middle Tennessee, and Wake Forest. 13th in the ACC, we have Boston College. So Boston College enters their first year under Bill O'Brien, who replaces Jeff Hafley at head coach. But Boston College went 7-6 last season, and I think they can get to a similar position again this year. They should have a great run game, as they have a great running back, Kai Robichaux, returning, plus they added Kansas State transfer Treshaun Ward, and that is a great 1-2 punch at running back. Plus, their quarterback, Thomas Castellanos, is one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the country, as he ran for well over 1,000 yards last season. So I'm expecting Boston College to be a very run-heavy team, and I also think they're going to be a good rushing team. Now, while Thomas Castellanos is a great runner, he's not the greatest passer, as he threw 14 interceptions last season, and that is another reason I think this Boston College offense will heavily lean on the run. Defensively for BC, it wasn't good last year, and I don't expect much improvement. They have some promising players, and I think Boston College has the potential to be a decent team. They play a fairly tough schedule, so they won't be good enough to get to a bowl game. I have them 4-8, 2-6 in the conference. Wins over Duquesne, Western Kentucky, Syracuse, and Pitt. 12th in the ACC, we have Wake Forest, another team that is going to be pretty bad. They were only 4-8 last year, and I think there's a slight chance for improvement, but I don't see them being too good. At quarterback, they have a three-way battle between true freshman Jeremy Holinsky, senior Michael Kern, and transfer Hank. I have no idea how to say this guy's name. Batchmere? I probably said that way off. But whoever their quarterback is, they will have some pretty good players around him, as their leading rusher from last year, Desmond Calderon, is back, as well as their second leading receiver, Taylor Morin. Now, the offensive line and defense are both major questions on this team, and I think that is greatly going to hold this team back. Wake Forest could be good if they figure out the quarterback position, and maybe they can get to a bowl game, but I have them 4-8, 2-6 in the ACC. Wins over North Carolina A&T, Virginia, Louisiana, and UConn. 11 in the ACC is Syracuse, and they're an interesting team. Under new head coach Fran Brown, they also brought in Ohio State transfer Kyle McCord at quarterback, and I think that's a pretty major upgrade at the quarterback position. Syracuse should also have a solid run game, as running back LaQueen Allen is back after he ran for over 1,000 yards last season. But I don't love the receivers for Syracuse, and the offensive line isn't great. Defensively, they brought in a new defensive coordinator, Elijah Robinson, and I would expect them to be pretty decent on the defensive side of the ball. I have Syracuse getting to a bowl game, going 6-6, although being 2-6 in the ACC. Wins over Ohio, Stanford, Holy Cross, UNLV, Pitt, and UConn. Number 10 in the ACC, we've got Georgia Tech. So Georgia Tech is your standard middle-of-the-road ACC team. They were pretty solid last year, going 7-6 and winning a bowl game for the first time since 2015. And I'm expecting another pretty solid season from Georgia Tech. They returned starting quarterback Haynes King, who actually led the ACC in touchdowns last year. Plus, they bring back running back Jamal Haynes, who ran for over 1,000 yards last year. Their top 4 receivers are back, as well as 4 starters along the offensive line. So I'm expecting this to be a pretty good Georgia Tech offense. Now, the defense was a major weakness of this team last year, and it definitely appears to be the Yellow Jackets' weakness once again this year. I think Georgia Tech will be a solid team, held back by their defense, and they could be better than 6-6, but that is where I have them, because they play a tough schedule with 5 ranked teams. Georgia Tech, as I said, goes 6-6, 3-5 in the ACC. Wins over Syracuse, Georgia State, VMI, Duke, North Carolina, and an upset win over Miami. 9th in the ACC is Cal. They're another team that enters their first season in the ACC, and they were a solid team last year at 6-7, and I'm expecting them to be somewhere in that range once again. Cal brings in North Texas transfer Chandler Rogers at quarterback, and he brings a big upgrade to the quarterback position, as he threw for 3,300 yards and 29 touchdowns last year. And Rogers will have some good weapons, as Cal returns their second leading receiver, and also brought in some other good receivers via the transfer portal. Cal should also have a great run game led by outstanding running back Jaden Ott, who had 1,300 yards last season. Now, the defense for Cal was bad last year, but they made some transfer portal additions, and I think this should be a pretty solid defense and a solid team overall. I have them at 500, 6-6, 3-5 in the ACC. Wins over UC Davis, San Diego State, Pitt, Oregon State, Wake Forest, and Stanford. 8th in the ACC, we've got North Carolina. So they're a tough team to predict because there's definitely some unknowns about this team. They lost star quarterback Drake May, who was the 3rd overall pick in the NFL draft. And they now have a 3-way quarterback battle between Max Johnson, Jacoby Criswell, and Connor Harrell. Outside the quarterback spot, North Carolina has one of the best rushers in the country in Amarian Hampton, who ran for 1,504 yards last year, plus their leading receiver J.J. Jones is back. Now, the offensive line and defense are two concerns on this team, as the offensive line returns just one starter, and the defense does return 7 starters, which is a good foundation to build off, but the defense just was not good last year at all. I have North Carolina going 7-5, 4-4 in conference play, wins over Minnesota, Charlotte, North Carolina Central, Duke, Pitt, Virginia, and Boston College. 7th in the ACC, we have SMU. So SMU enters the ACC coming off a great season as a member of the American, where they actually went 11-3 and won the conference. SMU was a really good overall team last year, but their offense was a big part of their success, and I'm expecting them to be quite good offensively once again. Quarterback Preston Stone is back after a late season injury last year, and they also bring back almost every key skill position player who played a role for them last season. Defensively, they were also good last year. They brought some transfers in to upgrade their positions where they weren't as strong. I'm expecting another good season for SMU. I'm not expecting them to win their conference like they did last season, especially not playing in a more difficult conference in the ACC. But SMU is one of the most underrated teams in the ACC, and I think they're a pretty underrated team just in the country overall. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people. SMU wins 10 games and goes 10-2, 6-2 in the ACC. Their only 2 losses against Florida State and Louisville. Now, SMU does play an easy schedule, so 10 wins might seem like they're better than they actually are, but I still think SMU is a very good team. 6th in the ACC, we have Louisville. So they're coming off a great season in their first year under head coach Jeff Brom, where they made it to the ACC championship game and went 10-4. Not quite expecting Louisville to do that again this year, but I think they will still be solid. They lost a lot of production from last season's team, as they lost quarterback Jack Plummer, their top 2 rushers Juwan Jordan and Isaac Rendo, as well as 2 of their top 3 receivers Jamari Thrash and Kevin Coleman. So Louisville has a lot to replace, especially offensively, and that starts with the quarterback position, where they brought in Texas Tech transfer Tyler Schuff, who he's been decent in his career as a Red Raider, but he has struggled to stay on the field for the entirety of his career. Running backs and receivers will be headlined by transfers, but I'm expecting a significant downgrade from last season. But overall, I think Louisville's offense isn't going to be too good, and I think they're going to be carried by their defense. As this defense was great last year, they returned 7 starters, and Louisville will be pretty good because of their defense. I have them going 8-4, 6-2 in the ACC. Losses to Notre Dame, Miami, Clemson, and Kentucky. 5th, we have Virginia Tech. I think they're another team that's quite underrated in the ACC. They've been pretty good. They were pretty good last year and won 5 of their last 7 games, and they returned most of their key players. I'm a big fan of their quarterback Kyron Drones, who's a great dual threat, and I think he's going to have a great season. The leading rusher is back from last season, as well as their leading receivers, and they returned 4 starters along the offensive line. So I'm expecting this to be a pretty good Virginia Tech offense, as long as Kyron Drones can be good, and he could even take another step forward. Now, defensively, the Hokies were solid last year, and they returned 8 starters, also added some transfers. Virginia Tech, pretty underrated team. I have them 9-3, 6-2 in the ACC, losing games to Rutgers, Miami, and Clemson. 4th in the ACC, we have Miami. So Miami has struggled lately, winning just 7 games last year and 5 the year before. They now enter their 3rd year under Mario Cristobal, and I think they have their best team with him as their head coach. I really like the addition of Washington State transfer Cam Ward, and I think he was one of the best transfer portal additions any team made. They also brought in Oregon State running back Damian Martinez, who ran for over 1,000 yards last year, and Miami returned star receiver Xavier Restrepo, who had over 1,000 yards receiving last year. The offensive line also returns 3 starters and should be pretty good, but my concerns for Miami is the defense and specifically the secondary, where they lost 4 defensive backs. And I think that could be a problem. I still think Miami will have a good season. They'll finish 9-3, 6-2 in the ACC. Losses to Florida, Florida State, and Georgia Tech. 3rd in the conference, we've got NC State. So NC State has been very good lately, as they have won 8 games in each of the past 4 seasons. and I'm expecting another season where they will win at least 8 games. NC State brought in Coastal Carolina quarterback Grayson McCall, who is one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the country. I also really like the addition of Duke transfer running back Jordan Waters, who's set for another big season after having over 800 yards last year. And the receiver group is great for NC State, led by receiver Kevin Concepcion, who had a big freshman season. And they also brought in Justin Jolly, Noah Rogers, and Wesley Grimes, giving Grayson McCall even more weapons. Up front along the offensive line, it should be good, returning 4 starters, and the one position they didn't return a starter was center, where they brought in Notre Dame center Zeke Correll. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they only returned 3 starters, which is a concern, and lost All-American linebacker Peyton Wilson. But the talent is there for NC State. They're a potential sweeper team in the ACC. I have them 10-2, 7-1 in conference play, lost to Tennessee and Clemson. Second in the ACC, we have Clemson. So Clemson is coming off a solid 9-4 season, which is good, but it's actually their first season since 2010 where they did not win at least 10 games. Clemson is still going to be good. Quarterback Cade Klubnik enters his second season as the starter, and he definitely needs to improve, but I think he should take a step forward. Clemson should also have a good run game, led by one of the best running backs in the ACC, Phil Mafah. Now, receiver needs to be better, as nobody had above 550 yards last year, and they didn't make any significant improvements to the position. The offensive line should also be good for Clemson, returning 4 starters. And defensively, Clemson returns just 2 starters, which is a concern, but they have plenty of players who can break out into above-average defenders. Clemson, a very talented team. I have concerns about their level of depth because of their lack of transfers, but Clemson, I still think will go 10-2, get back to winning 10 games, 7-1 in the ACC, losses to Georgia and Florida State. But I could actually see Clemson being a little bit worse than this. That leaves Florida State to finish first in the ACC in the regular season. I think they're the clear team to beat in the ACC. They went 13-1 last year, should have made the college football playoff. And now this Florida State team is miles behind where they were last year, but they're still a great team. They brought in DJ Uiagalelei, who returns to the ACC after a year with Oregon State in the Pac-12. Now, Florida State lost leading rusher Trey Benson, but brought in Alabama transfer Roydell Williams, plus they still have Lawrence Toafili. Now, they lost their top 3 pass catchers, but brought in Alabama transfer Malik Benson. And defensively for Florida State, they also lost a bunch of key players, brought in a ton of key transfers on the defensive side of the ball. And I think this defense should be a strength of the team. But overall, I think Florida State is the best team in the ACC. But they're way behind where they were last year, just from an overall just depth and talent perspective. But Florida State's still going to be a great team. I have them 11-1, 8-0 in the ACC. Their only loss comes to Notre Dame. And in the ACC championship game, it will be Clemson against Florida State. They meet in the regular season, where I have Florida State winning that game. I think the same thing happens in the ACC championship game. Florida State goes 12-1, and this time as a one-loss conference champion, make the college football playoff. Because obviously, with the new 12-team playoff, the top 4 conference champions are guaranteed to make it. Moving on to the Big Ten, or really the Big 18, but 18th in the Big Ten, we have Purdue. So Purdue went 4-8 last year, year 1 under Ryan Walters. Offensively, they returned some key players like quarterback Hudson Card and running back Devin Mockabee. At receiver, they lost their leading receiver Deion Burks, but brought in some transfers. The offensive line was not good last season, but returns 4 starters. And defensively, it was not good for Purdue last season, and I'm expecting a bad defense once again, but there could be a slight improvement. I don't see Purdue winning that many games. They play a very tough schedule. I have them going 3-9, 1-8 in conference play. Wins over Indiana State, Oregon State, and Northwestern. 17th in the Big Ten, we've got Indiana. So Indiana is heading into year 1 under new head coach Curt Cignetti, who comes to Indiana after going 52-9 during his time at James Madison. Indiana brought in a lot of transfers, and this team is going to look much different than it did last season. At the quarterback position, they bring in Ohio transfer Curtis Rourke, and he's going to be the starter. Indiana also brings in transfers Justice Ellison, at running back and receivers Miles Price and Elijah Surratt. Plus, their leading receiver Donovan McCulley is back. Now, defensively for Indiana, they have a lot of James Madison transfers who follow their head coach. And I think Indiana will be okay. Definitely one of the bottom teams in the Big Ten. Have potential. I've got them going 5-7, 2-7 in conference play. Wins over Florida International, Western Illinois, Charlotte, Maryland, and Purdue. Number 16 in the conference, I've got Northwestern. So Northwestern had an extremely surprising season last year, where they went 8-5 and won a bowl game. Now I think Northwestern will take a step back from where they were a year ago. As offensively, the quarterback position is a question, as they brought in Mississippi State transfer Mike Wright, but there's a couple other quarterbacks who could make a push for the starting job. Outside of the quarterback spot, Northwestern returned some good playmakers, such as leading rusher Cam Porter, as well as two of their top three receivers, Bryce Kurtz and A.J. Henning. But offensively, there are major concerns at the quarterback, and that could definitely hold this offense back. Defensively, Northwestern should be strong, returning 7 starters, and the defense should be the strength of the team. But overall, I think Northwestern should be a solid team. I've got them going 5-7, 2-7 in the Big Ten. Wins over Miami, Ohio, Duke, Eastern Illinois, Indiana, and Illinois. 15th in the Big Ten, we've got Minnesota. So Minnesota went 6-7 last year, which is their first losing season since 2017, when you exclude 2020. I think Minnesota should be a decent team, and they have potential for a bounce-back season. They brought in New Hampshire quarterback Max Brosmer, who's a great quarterback at the FCS level in the past 2 seasons. Minnesota also returns running back Darius Taylor, who I think is going to have a big year after he ran for 800 yards in 6 games last season. Minnesota also returns leading receiver Daniel Jackson, and on the defensive side of the ball, they return 8 starters. So that should lead Minnesota to being a solid team. Now, I don't think their record will be that good because they play a fairly tough schedule. I've got Minnesota 4-8, but they're going to be a better team than just 4 wins. 2-7 in the Big Ten. Wins over Rhode Island, Nevada, Maryland, and UCLA. Michigan State is number 14, and Michigan State, 14th in the conference, we've got Michigan State. So, Michigan State was a mess last year, and I think they begin their turnaround by hiring a great head coach, Jonathan Smith, from Oregon State. Offensively, Michigan State brings in Aiden Childs, also from Oregon State. Now, Childs is a bit of a question. He definitely has potential, but hasn't seen much playing time. He also has some good weapons around him, such as running back Nathan Carter, who ran for 800 yards, and receivers Montre Fraser and Nick Marsh. Now, defensively for the Spartans, they were terrible last year, but they brought in some transfers on top of the 6 returning starters, and that could lead to this team being decent defensively. I think they'll be a decent overall team, and they'll definitely show improvement year 1 under Jonathan Smith, and I think it will be a step in the right direction. I've got Michigan State going 5-7, 2-7 in conference play, wins over FAU, Prairie View A&M, Boston College, Indiana, and Purdue. 13th in the Big Ten, we've got Illinois. So Illinois went 5-7 last year, which was a drop from 2022, where they went 8-5. Offensively this season for Illinois, quarterback Luke Altmaier is back and should take a step forward. Now, Illinois lost their leading rusher, Reggie Love, as well as their leading receiver, Isaiah Williams, but they seem to have players ready to fill those roles. Now, defensively for Illinois, they struggled last season and also lost some key players, like Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, but they brought in some transfers, and I don't think the defense will be terrible. Overall, I don't think Illinois will be that bad. I don't think they'll be that good either. They'll be average. I've got them 5-7, 3-6 in the Big Ten. Wins over Eastern Illinois, Central Michigan, Purdue, Minnesota, and Michigan State. 12th in the Big Ten, we've got Maryland. So Maryland is your standard middle-of-the-road Big Ten team, and they've been that way for the past 3 seasons, being a little over 500. Maryland has now lost some key players from last season, such as quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, who's now in the NFL. And they currently have a 3-way quarterback battle between last year's backup Billy Edwards, Cameron Edge, and NC State transfer MJ Morris. Whoever wins the starting job will have some good weapons around him, as Maryland returns leading rusher Roman Hemby, as well as 2 of their top 3 receivers, Caden Prather and Ty Felton. The offensive line is an area of concern for me, having to replace 4 players from last season, and the defense also lost some pieces, but they returned enough to make it solid. Overall, Maryland's going to be a decent team. I see them making a bowl game at 6-6, 3-6 in the conference. Wins over UConn, Michigan State, Virginia, Villanova, Northwestern, and Rutgers. 11th in the Big Ten, I've got Rutgers. So Rutgers is coming off a good season where they went 7-6 and won their first bowl game since 2014. Rutgers offensively, just like last season, should have a great run game, as running back Kyle Monangai is back after rushing for 1,200 yards last year, and Rutgers also has a good offensive line with 4 returning starters. Now, the passing game for Rutgers probably isn't going to be that good, as they were a bad passing team last year, not even throwing for 1,800 yards, and quarterback Gavin Wimsatt has transferred to Kentucky. Rutgers now brought in Minnesota transfer Ethan, I'm going to say this name way off, Kaliakmanis. I probably said that so far off, it's pretty funny to you guys who actually know how to say his name. But they brought him in, and I really don't think he's that good of a quarterback. The receiver position is rough as well, and I think Rutgers will be an extremely run-heavy team. Now, the Rutgers defense is great, and they should be equally as good as they were last year as they returned 6 starters. And Rutgers is going to be your classic Big Ten team, a good run game and a good defense. Rutgers will be pretty solid, finishing with a 7-5 record, 4-5 in the Big Ten, losses to Washington, Nebraska, UCLA, USC, and Maryland. 10th in the Big Ten, I've got UCLA. So UCLA enters this season with a new head coach, and that is former UCLA running back Deshaun Foster. UCLA's offense has the potential to be pretty good, as quarterback Ethan Garbers is solid, plus running back TJ Harden returns after rushing for over 800 yards last year, and I think Harden is in line for a big season, because now he's the clear top running back for UCLA as opposed to last year, where he was splitting work with other players. UCLA also brings back their top 3 pass catchers from last season, and overall I think their offense should be pretty good, with the potential to be really good, if they can figure out the quarterback position, and Garbers is that guy. Now, while the offense is good, I don't think the defense will be that good. They were great defensively last year, but they lost a lot of key players, including NFL first-round pick Oyatu Watu. But UCLA will be decent this year in their first season as a member of the Big Ten. I've got them going 7-5, 4-5 in conference play. Wins over Hawaii, Indiana, Minnesota, Rutgers, Iowa, Nebraska, and Fresno State. 9th in the conference, we've got another new team to the conference, Washington. So Washington is coming off an amazing season where they went 14-1 and made it all the way to the national championship game. Now Washington is not going to be anywhere near as good as they were last year, as they lost nearly every key player from that team, as well as head coach Kalen DeBoer. Now Washington hired Jedd Fisch from Arizona, which is a good hire, but they're still going to be miles behind where this team was last year. Washington brought in Mississippi State transfer quarterback Will Rogers, and they also brought in Arizona transfer Jonah Coleman at running back, and receiver Jeremiah Hunter from Cal. And that is a good trio of players which will help this offense. But after the offensive line was arguably the best in the country last year, they don't return a single starter, and the defense, which wasn't even that great last year, also has very little returning production. They were able to bring in some transfers. Washington will be a solid team and goes 7-5, 4-5 in conference play. Losses to Michigan, Iowa, USC, Penn State, and Oregon. 8th in the Big Ten, we've got Nebraska. So there is some excitement surrounding Nebraska entering this season, as they brought in 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola, and they have named him their starting quarterback. Plus, they brought in some key transfers, such as running back Dante Dowdle from Oregon, and receiver Jamal Banks from Wake Forest. The offensive line returns 4 starters from a season ago and should be pretty solid. And the Nebraska defense was also good last year and should be good once again, as they return several key players. But Nebraska definitely has the potential for a big season, and they could get to a bowl game, as they actually have the longest active bowl drought among Power 5 teams. I think Nebraska will be solid. I have concerns about them having a true freshman quarterback, but I think Nebraska will have their best season in years, and they will go 8-4, 5-4 in the conference. Losses to Ohio State, USC, UCLA, and Iowa. Number 7 in the Big Ten is Wisconsin. So Wisconsin's coming off an underwhelming season last year where they went 7-6 in Season 1 under Luke Fickell. Offensively, Wisconsin brought in Miami transfer Tyler Van Dyke, and he was named the starting quarterback. But I really don't love that move. Van Dyke has only had one good year with Miami, and that was back in 2021, but in each of the past 2 seasons, he has been quite bad. So that's concerning for me. Wisconsin also lost star running back Braylon Allen to the NFL, but their other good running back, Chet Malusi, is back and healthy, and I think Wisconsin should have a pretty good run game. The receiver position is also solid as Wisconsin brings in or returns their top 2 receivers from a season ago, Will Pauling and Bryson Green. Now, defensively, there are some questions, but they brought in some transfers, and the defense should be solid. Wisconsin should be a decent team. I think they'll be pretty good, but I think Tyler Van Dyke could hold this team back, because as I said, I don't think he's that good. I've got Wisconsin 7-5, 5-4 in conference play. Losses to Alabama, USC, Penn State, Iowa, and Oregon. 6th in the Big Ten, we've got Iowa. So Iowa is essentially the same team every year. Elite defense, terrible offense. But somehow they're usually one of the better teams in the Big Ten. Now, offensively for Iowa, I again expect them to be quite bad. Not quite as bad as previous seasons, as they parted ways with offensive coordinator Brian Ferentz, and they hired Tim Lester. Now, the quarterback position for Iowa is a big question, as they have a battle between Cade McNamara, who's returning from injury, and Northwestern transfer Brendan Sullivan. They haven't announced his starter yet, but whoever it is will definitely need to be decent if the offense wants to score even 20 points a game, which last year, shockingly, they were not able to hit. The running back position has a good duo of Sean Williams and Caleb Johnson, as the two combined for over 1,200 yards last year, but there isn't many positives on the offensive side of the ball. Now, defensively, Iowa is always good. The last time their defense has allowed more than 20 points a game was in 2014. And Iowa should be a great defense once again, as they return 8 starters, although they did lose star defensive back Cooper DeJean to the NFL. But this should be one of the best defenses in the country. As far as the record goes for Iowa, it's going to be interesting to see them play. I think they'll play a lot of pretty close games because their defense is going to keep them in a lot of games, but their offense is bad. But I've got Iowa 10-2, 7-2 in conference play, losing against UCLA and Ohio State. But they play a pretty easy schedule, but I think they're a team that's not going to be quite as good as their record may suggest. Number 5 in the conference, we've got USC. So USC is coming off a massively disappointing season where they went just 8-5 last year. They lost Caleb Williams, who was a big reason they were able to win even 8 games, but replacing Caleb Williams is Miller Moss, who was great in the Holiday Bowl, plus Lincoln Riley has a great track record with quarterbacks, so I'm really not that worried about the quarterback position. Or really the other skill positions for that matter, because USC has plenty of talent, like running back Woody Marks, and do-it-all receiver Zachariah Branch. Now, the offensive line is another big question, with just one starter returning, and the defense is the other big question. And the USC defense was really bad last year. They fired defensive coordinator Alex Grinch, and I'm expecting a slight improvement, but I still don't think the defense will be anywhere close to good. But overall, I think USC will be a pretty solid team. I think the offensive line and defense will hold this team back. And in their first year as a member of the Big Ten, USC will have an 8-4 record, 7-2 in conference play, losses against LSU, Michigan, Penn State, and Notre Dame. 4th in the Big Ten is the reigning national champions, Michigan. So they're coming off a perfect 15-0 season, but lost a lot of good players from that team, although I still think they'll be pretty good. Offensively, they lost quarterback J.J. McCarthy, even though I don't think he was that good, although it will still be a significant downgrade. But they will now either start Jack Tuttle, who's been in college for like a decade, not quite, but a long time, or they'll start dual threat quarterback Alex Orji, who's not a very good passer. Michigan also lost star running back Blake Corum to the NFL, but they're going to be perfectly fine at the running back position, as they have Donovan Edwards, who's now going to have a huge season now that he's the clear lead back. Michigan also lost their top 2 receivers to the NFL, Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson, but the offensive line is still going to be one of the best in the country. Now, I'm expecting Michigan to do what they've done in the recent seasons, and that is run the ball a lot. Not having a good quarterback hurts, but it won't be a huge loss because even though they had a quarterback who had some talent last year in McCarthy, they didn't throw the ball that much anyway. And Michigan's defense is going to be really good once again, They lost a few players from the defensive side of the ball, but they still have arguably the best corner in the country, Will Johnson, as well as star defensive lineman Mason Graham. Michigan won't be a national title contender. They'll still be a good team. They're not anywhere near as talented as they were last year. But they're going to have a dominant run game, dominant defense, good enough to win them 9 games. I've got them 9-3, 7-2 in the conference, losses to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. Penn State is going to be number 3 in the conference, and they've never made the college football playoff, but they have a chance to make it as it is now expanded to 12 teams. And they have a great team and a pretty easy schedule as well. Offensively, Penn State returns quarterback Drew Allar, even though I don't think he's very good. Wasn't good last year, and maybe he can take a step forward, but I still don't think he's that good. The run game for Penn State should be quite good, and that is what this offense is built around. They have arguably the best running back duo in the country, consisting of Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, as the two combined for over 1,600 yards last year. Now, the receiver position is a concern after losing Keandre Lambert-Smith, who transferred to Auburn, but they brought in Ohio State transfer Julian Fleming, plus they still have tight end Tyler Warren, who's a great option in the passing game. Now, the defense for Penn State was great last year and should be quite good once again, even though they lost some key players like Chop Robinson and Kalen King. Penn State will finish 3rd in the Big Ten with an 11-1 record, 8-1 in conference play, because they have an easy schedule, only lost to Ohio State. 2nd in the Big Ten in the regular season, I've got Ohio State. So Ohio State enters this season as one of the top teams in the country. They got a lot of key players in the transfer portal to replace players from last season. And offensively, they brought in Kansas State quarterback Will Howard to play quarterback. Now, my number one concern about Will Howard is he's a good quarterback, but I don't know if he's good enough to be the type of quarterback to truly take over a game like an elite quarterback would. But Will Howard is a good quarterback, and he's an upgrade over Kyle McCord. At running back, Ohio State is another team with an outstanding running back duo with Ole Miss transfer Quishon Judkins, as well as Travion Henderson. Then at the receiver position, Ohio State lost Marvin Harrison Jr., which is a huge void to fill, but Ohio State always has good receivers, with Emeka Mbuka returning for another season. True freshman Jeremiah Smith and sophomore Carnell Tate should lead a good receiving corps. Now, the offensive line should also be good with at least 4 starters returning. And defensively, Ohio State was elite last season and returned a lot of key pieces to that defense, such as edge rushers JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, as well as cornerback Denzel Burke. Plus, they added star safety Caleb Downs. Ohio State has a great team. I think if their offense is really good like other Ohio State offenses have been, this Ohio State team has potential to be the best team in the country. As it is now, they're a top 3 team in the country. I've got Ohio State going 11-1, 8-1 in conference play. Their lone loss coming at Oregon. So that means winning the conference, I have Oregon. Oregon enters their first season as a member of the Big Ten, and they're one of the best teams in the country. Now, Oregon actually lost a lot of talent from last year's team, but they did a great job of landing transfers and putting Oregon in a position to contend not only for a Big Ten championship, but a national championship as well. Oregon lost quarterback Bo Nix, but brought in actually 2 quarterbacks, Oklahoma transfer Dylan Gabriel, as well as UCLA transfer Dante Moore. Dylan Gabriel will be the starter, and he's actually one of the Heisman favorites at this moment. Oregon also returns a great running back duo of Noah Whittington and Jordan James. Plus, at receiver, they bring back their second leading receiver from last season, Tez Johnson, who had over 1,000 yards. Plus, they add Texas A&M transfer Evan Stewart. But Oregon, they're going to be one of the most explosive offenses in the country and one of the best offenses overall. Defensively, Oregon returns just 4 starters, but they brought in some great transfers on all 3 levels of the defense. I've got Oregon going 12-0 in the regular season and beating Ohio State, who they get at home. And in the Big Ten championship game, we've got a rematch, Ohio State and Oregon. I don't see one of these teams winning both games. Both teams are too talented. I'm going to give Ohio State the Big Ten championship, but both teams will easily make the college football playoff. Moving on to the Big 12, which is now 16 teams after they added their expansion teams. But BYU is going to finish last or 16th in the Big 12. They're a newer team to the Big 12, and they're going to finish near the bottom of the conference. I've got them at the bottom. They have an ongoing quarterback battle between transfer Jerry Bohannon and last year's starter for half the season, Jake Retzlaff. Outside of whoever the quarterback is, they've got some good targets as their top three receivers are back from last season, and leading rusher from last season, L.J. Martin, also returns. The defense was brutal for BYU last year, and I think there could be a slight improvement, but overall I don't think BYU will be that good. They'll be one of the worst teams in the conference. BYU 3-9, 1-8 in the Big 12, wins over Southern Illinois, Wyoming, and Baylor. 15th, we've got Houston. So Houston's another newer team to the conference, coming off a pretty bad season in their first year as a member of the conference, going just 4-8. Now, Houston hired Willie Fritz as their head coach, and he comes in after having a great past two seasons at Tulane with a combined record of 23-4. Fritz now comes to Houston, and he inherits a team that is pretty bad. Offensively, they have Donovan Smith at quarterback, who's pretty solid. Plus, they've got some good running backs and receivers as they return leading rusher Parker Jenkins and second leading receiver Joseph Manjack. Plus, they brought in Michigan State tight end transfer Malik Carr. Now, the offensive line is not very good, and neither is the defense, as the defense brings back just two starters and was already bad last year. Overall, Houston's not going to be great. I've got them 3-9, 1-8 in the Big 12, wins over Rice, UNLV, and BYU. Number 14 in the conference is Arizona State. They're entering their first year in the Big 12 and their second season under head coach Kenny Dillingham. Offensively, Arizona lost quarterback Jaden Rashada, who transferred to Georgia, but they now have Michigan State transfer quarterback Sam Leavitt as their starting quarterback, and Arizona State also returns their leading rusher from last season, Cam Scatabo, who had nearly 800 rushing yards. I probably said his name way off. Now, receiver is a concern, as they need some players to step up there, as their top two receivers from last season both transferred out of the program. And defensively for Arizona State, I don't expect them to be too good, returning just three starters. But I do have Arizona State going 3-9, 1-8 in the Big 12, wins over Wyoming, Texas State, and BYU. 13th, we've got Cincinnati. So Cincinnati's in a very similar position to Houston. They enter their second season in the Big 12 after a first season where they weren't very good, going just 3-9. Cincinnati brings in a lot of new players from the transfer portal, and it's hard to tell how good they will be, but I don't expect them to be too good. At quarterback, they brought in Indiana transfer Brendan Sorsby, and Ohio State transfer Evan Troyer at running back, plus multiple transfer receivers. Cincinnati also brings back 1,000-yard rusher from last season, Corey Kiner, as well as all five players along the offensive line. So the offense has some pieces to work with, but I don't think the offense will be too good overall. The defense returns four starters, and also adds some players via the transfer portal who could make an instant impact. Overall, I think Cincinnati's got some potential, but I just don't see them putting it all together. They'll finish with a 4-8 record, 3-6 in the conference. Wins over Townsend, Houston, Arizona State, and West Virginia. Number 12 in the Big 12 is Baylor. So this is the big season for Baylor head coach Dave Aranda. Since winning the Big 12 in 2021, he has a combined record of 9-16 over the past two seasons, and he went just 3-9 last year. So if Baylor is bad once again, I think that could be it for Dave Aranda. The Baylor offense is led by Toledo transfer DeQuan Finn, who's a great dual threat quarterback. Outside the quarterback position, Baylor's got some good players, like a good running back duo of Dominic Richardson and Richard Reese, but their top four receivers also returned last season. Now, the offensive line is a major concern, and will hold back this team as far as the offense goes. And the defense could be solid with 7 returning starters, and Baylor could be a decent team, but I've got them going 5-7, 3-6 in the conference. Wins over Tarleton State, Air Force, Colorado, Iowa State, and Houston. Number 11 is Colorado. So Colorado's an interesting team. They've got some talent, but there are some major weaknesses on this team that will prevent them from reaching their highest potential. Offensively, they return star quarterback Shedeur Sanders, who's one of the better quarterbacks in the country. Plus, they have a great receiver duo of Jimmy Horn Jr. and Travis Hunter. Colorado probably be a one-dimensional offense. Don't really have a good running back, and the offensive line was brutal. They did bring in 10 transfers along the offensive line, though, but I still think it could be a point of weakness. Speaking of weaknesses, the defense is another area of the team that's not too strong. They've got Travis Hunter at quarterback and a couple transfers, but similar to the offensive line, defense will be pretty bad. Colorado will fail to make a bowl game, going 5-7, 3-6 in the conference. Wins over North Dakota State, Colorado State, UCF, Cincinnati, and Texas Tech. Number 10 in the Big 12, we've got TCU. So TCU took a massive step back last year after making all the way to the national title game in 2022. Offensively this year, TCU will start Josh Hoover at quarterback, who was the team's quarterback for the second half of the season last year. And TCU has some good receivers such as Savion Williams and J.P. Richardson, both of which had over 500 yards last year. But TCU also has to replace a 1,000-yard rusher from a season ago, Amari Bailey, which won't be an easy task, and the offensive line is also a major concern, returning just one starter. Now, the TCU defense was a weakness last year, but could show some improvement. But overall, I don't think TCU is going to be that great. I've got them 10th in the Big 12, 5-7 record for the second consecutive season, 3-6 in the Big 12, wins over Stanford, Long Island, Houston, Baylor, and Cincinnati. Texas Tech is number 9, and they're a team that could be solid, but I don't think will be anything too great. Offensively, quarterback Baron Morton is back, but he will need to find new go-to targets on the outside, as 3 of their top 4 pass catchers from last season are no longer with the team, but Texas Tech did bring in a few receiver transfers. Now, while the passing game has questions, the run game should be solid, as they return start running back Taj Brooks, who had over 1,500 yards last year, but the concern is the offensive line returns just one starter. Now, the defense is another question for Texas Tech, returning just 4 starters from a not great defense last season, but Texas Tech should be a solid team. I've got them 7-5, 4-5 in the conference, losses to Arizona, Iowa State, Colorado, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia. Number 8 in the Big 12, I've got UCF. So UCF is entering their second season as a member of the Big 12, and I think they should be a decent team, and they definitely have potential. Offensively, UCF should be quite good. They lost quarterback John Rice Plumlee, but brought in Arkansas transfer KJ Jefferson, who's a great dual threat player. And UCF also returns running back RJ Harvey, who had 1,416 yards last year. Additionally to that, the second leading receiver Kobe Hudson is back after a 900-yard season last year. The offensive line is a concern with just 2 returning starters, but I think this should be a really good UCF offense. The weakness of the team again this year is the defense. They brought in a bunch of defensive transfers, which could make this a better defense. I think UCF is a team that's going to play in a lot of high-scoring games. Could win some, could lose some. They're a solid team, got potential. We'll finish 7-5, 5-4 in the Big 12. Losses to Colorado, Florida, Iowa State, Arizona, and Utah. Number 7, we've got Iowa State. So Iowa State surprisingly went 7-6 last year, and I think they could have another good season, as they return starting quarterback Rocco Becht, plus they return a great receiver duo of Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, both of which had over 800 receiving yards last year. The run game also has potential with Abu Sama, who was good late in the season last year, returning, and he also averaged 7.3 yards per carry. And the offensive line should also be good. So this should be a pretty good Iowa State offense. Defensively, Iowa State always seems to be good, and I think that's going to be the case again. They returned 9 starters, and Iowa State is a sleeper team here in the Big 12. I've got them going 8-4, 5-4 in conference play. They have potential to be better, but they play a pretty tough schedule. Losses to Baylor, Kansas, Utah, and Kansas State. Number 6, I've got West Virginia. So West Virginia is coming off a shocking season where they went 9-4 last year, which is their best season since 2016, where they won 10 games. And West Virginia returns a lot of key players from last season's team, including dual-threat quarterback Garrett Green, and he's back after a big year last year. West Virginia will have a great running game because they've got 2 great running backs, Jaheim White and C.J. Donaldson, as the duo combined for 1,600 yards and 15 touchdowns last season. And when you add what Garrett Green can do as a runner, with 772 yards and 13 scores last season, this is going to be a really good West Virginia run game. Now, the passing game I'm a little bit concerned about, but specifically the receivers, as Devin Carter is the only player who had more than 500 receiving yards last season, and he's no longer with the team. Now, the West Virginia defense wasn't great last year, but after some good transfer portal additions, I think they'll show some improvement. But overall, this is a good West Virginia team. They play a tough schedule. I have them going 8-4, 6-3 in the conference. Losses to Penn State, Kansas State, Iowa State, and Arizona. Number 5 in the Big 12, I've got Oklahoma State. So I know there's some people who think Oklahoma State will be better than this and one of the top teams in the conference. I think they're a really good team, but I'm not quite as high on them as some other people are. Offensively, they should be quite good, but here's the problem. Quarterback Alan Bowman. I don't trust him. He turns the ball over too much, and he's too inconsistent. But outside of Alan Bowman, the rest of the offense is great. Brennan Presley and Rashad Owens are two good receivers who had over 800 yards each last year. Plus, Oklahoma State returns Ollie Gordon, who's arguably the best running back in the country. And he's coming off a season where he led the country in rushing yards. And I think Ollie Gordon will have another great season behind an offensive line that should be quite good. But Oklahoma State has the potential to be a really good offensive team if Alan Bowman can be more consistent and not turn the ball over. Now, the Cowboys defense struggled last year, but they returned several starters who could improve and make this a better overall defense. But overall, Oklahoma State is a team with a good offense that could be better, and the defense, it's okay. I've got them going 10-2, 7-2 in the conference, losses to West Virginia and Kansas State, but they have potential to be much better, maybe even win the conference and make the playoff, who knows. Number 4 in the Big 12, I've got Kansas. So Kansas is coming off a great year where they went 9-4, and that was their first winning season since 2008. To make that more impressive for Kansas, they did a lot of that with backup quarterback Jalen Bean at quarterback because their quarterback from last year, starting quarterback Jalen Daniels, was injured. Now, Daniels is back this season, and if he can stay healthy, I think he's going to have a great season. He's a great dual threat player, and he should lead a really good Kansas offense. Running back Devin Neal is another great player on this offense, and he returns after over 1,200 rushing yards last season. And Kansas had 3 players who had at least 500 receiving yards last season, those being Quentin Skinner, Lawrence Arnold, and Luke Grimm. All 3 of those players return. And this should be a quite dynamic Kansas offense with a great run game and pass game. Now, the defense has also made steady improvement under head coach Lance Leipold, and I think the defense will be good once again with great players on all 3 levels of the defense. Kansas is going to have a great season. I have them 10-2, 7-2 in the Big 12. Losses to West Virginia and Kansas State. Number 3 in the Big 12 is Arizona. So Arizona is coming off a great year last year where they went 10-3, which was their best season since 2014. Now, Arizona lost to head coach Jedd Fisch, who is now at Washington, and they hired Brent Brennan. Now, offensively, Arizona should be quite good. Last year's quarterback Noah Fifita took the starting job and ran with it midway through the season, and his top target and former high school teammate, Teradoree McMillan, is back after a 1,400-yard season, and he's one of the top receivers in the country. Now, the run game is solid, and it's led by a couple of transfer backs, and the offensive line is solid overall, returning 3 starters. But this should be a great Arizona offense, and especially a really good passing game. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, Arizona was great last season, and they returned 5 starters. They did lose some players who were key contributors to that team, but Arizona's a great team. I think they're a little slept on in the Big 12 title race. I've got them going 10-2, 8-1 in the Big 12, losses to Kansas State and Utah. Now, I know those are 2 Big 12 teams, but Arizona against Kansas State is actually a non-conference game because it was scheduled before Arizona made the move to the Big 12. Second in the conference, I've got Utah. So Utah is one of the best teams in the Big 12. Offensively for Utah, quarterback Cam Rising is finally back after missing all of last season with the torn ACL. And it will be over 600 days since Rising's last game by the time he takes a snap in Week 1. But he is one of the most experienced and reliable quarterbacks in the country. Utah returns running back Jalen Glover, who had over 500 yards last season, as the team's second-string running back. But the receiver position is an area of concern I have for this team, but they do have guys who can step up, such as USC transfer Dorian Singer. Now, the defense is always good for Utah. I can't remember the last time it hasn't been good. And that should be the case once again with 8 starters returning from a great defense last year. Utah's got a great team. Now that they've got their quarterback back, they're going to be one of the best teams in the Big 12. I've got them going 11-1, 8-1 in the Big 12, only lost at Oklahoma State. And number 1 in the Big 12 is Kansas State. So Kansas State is a really exciting team coming into the season, especially offensively, where they're led by dual threat quarterback Avery Johnson. Now, Avery Johnson hasn't seen a ton of playing time, as he saw limited action in his true freshman season last year, but was quite good in his limited playing time. At running back, Kansas State has a great duo of DJ Giddens, a player who had well over 1,000 rushing yards last season, plus a dual threat Colorado transfer Dylan Edwards. Now, Kansas State did lose their top 2 pass catchers from last season, but they have plenty of players right there ready to step up. The offensive line is a concern, returning just 2 starters, but I think they will be okay. And the defense for Kansas State is going to be quite good. They've returned 7 starters from last season, and they should be really good once again. I've got Kansas State going 12-0 in the regular season. I definitely think they could lose a game or 2, but I have a hard time finding a loss because I don't know, they play a lot of their good teams on the schedule at home. They get Arizona at home, Oklahoma State at home, and Kansas at home. And their next hardest game is at Iowa State. So it's definitely possible they drop one of those games at home, but I've got them going 12-0 in the regular season. Now, in the Big 12 championship game, I don't see Kansas State going undefeated, so I'm going to take Utah to win and make the college football playoff at 12-1, winning the Big 12 in their first season. Moving on to how I think Notre Dame will do this year. Obviously, they're independent, but they're always a part of the Power 5. So I'm going to predict them as well. But Notre Dame is a great team. I feel like they might be a little overlooked with how good this team actually is. Offensively, they hired Mike Denbrock, who's one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. And they also brought in Duke transfer quarterback Riley Leonard, who I've always been a huge fan of, and I think is going to have a great season. At running back, they lost star Audric Estime, but still have a talented duo of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. And at receiver, they brought in Chris Mitchell, who was a 1,000-yard receiver at FIU last year, and also brought in Clemson transfer Bill Collins. Plus, Notre Dame already has Mitchell Evans, who I think is the best tight end in the country. Then on the defensive side of things, Notre Dame was great last year, and that should be the case once again, as they returned star defensive backs Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison, plus they brought in Duke transfer edge rusher RJ Oben. Plus, they have numerous great players I didn't even mention. But Notre Dame is a great team. I think they have the best chance to go undefeated of any team in the regular season, or just any team in general. But I've got Notre Dame going 12-0 and making the college football playoff. But something to note for Notre Dame, more on this later when I get to my playoff predictions. They actually can't be one of the top 4 seeds in the playoff and get a first round bye because they're not in a conference, and the top 4 seeds have to go to conference champions. Moving on to the Pac-12, so it's technically a conference, but there's not a ton to talk about. It's only a 2-team conference. But I'm going to predict the Oregon State and Washington State anyway. Oregon State, they're going to take a massive step back, going 8-5 last season, after they took a step back last year, going 10-3 the year before. But Oregon State lost head coach Jonathan Smith, who's now at Michigan State, and they lost a lot of key players overall. Quarterback DJ Ubiangole, running back Damian Martinez, offensive lineman Luis Fuaga, receivers Silas Bolden and Anthony Gold are all players no longer with the team. Oregon State has a 3-way quarterback battle between Gavani McCoy, Ben Gulbranson, who was the team starter in 2022, and Missouri transfer Gabari Johnson. Running back, they have a couple of transfers to replace Damian Martinez, although that's not going to be an easy task as he ran for well over 1,000 yards last season. But the Oregon State defense was a strength of the team, and has been a strength of the team recently. Should be the strength of the team once again. Overall, I don't think Oregon State will be great. Nothing terrible, but I've got them 6-6. Washington State, the other team in the Pac-12, they started off great last season before they stumbled to a 5-7 finish. And they now lost some players from that team, such as quarterback Cam Ward, who's now transferred to Miami. Redshirt sophomore John Mateer is now the quarterback, but he doesn't have many established receivers to throw to. And that could be a problem because this is a Washington State offense that likes to throw the ball a lot. Now, the defense for Washington State was pretty bad last year, and I don't really see there being any reason for major improvements. I've got Washington State 5-7. And in the head-to-head matchup between Oregon State and Washington State, I got the Beavers. Moving to our final conference, and that is the SEC. 16th or last in the SEC, I've got Vanderbilt, no surprise. Vanderbilt's been pretty bad lately, as they went 2-10 last season and haven't had a winning record since 2012. Vanderbilt brought in Utah transfer Nate Johnson at quarterback, and Johnson's a great runner, but questionable as a passer at times. They also returned leading rusher from last season, Cedric Alexander, but the receiver position and offensive line are big questions. But at the very least, they should have a solid run game. Now, defensively for Vanderbilt, they have been the worst in the SEC for a few seasons now, and I think that trend will continue, despite them having a few good players like CJ Taylor and Langston Patterson. Overall, this won't be a very good season for Vanderbilt. Not a good team overall. I've been going 3-9, 0-8 in the SEC, wins over Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State. 15th in the conference is Mississippi State. So Mississippi State is a complete mess right now. They went 5-7 last year, and fired head coach Zach Arnett after not even a full season, and they've now hired former Oklahoma offensive coordinator Jeff Lebby. Now, Lebby doesn't have a ton to work with in his first season with Mississippi State, as they essentially returned no production from last season's team. They brought in Baylor quarterback Blake Shapen, as well as some other players via the transfer portal at running back and receiver. Plus, the offensive line is a major weakness. The defense is another big question for this team, was terrible last year, and doesn't look to be too good once again. Mississippi State's going to struggle this year, not going to win a single game in the conference. They'll go 4-8, 0-8 in the SEC. Wins over Arizona State, Toledo, UMass, and Eastern Kentucky. 14th in the SEC is Arkansas. So this is a big season for Arkansas head coach Sam Pittman, as Arkansas has been declining after a 9-win season in 2021. They're coming off a 4-8 season last year. And if Arkansas doesn't have a good season, it's not looking good for Sam Pittman. Offensively, Arkansas hired their former head coach Bobby Petrino to be their offensive coordinator, but I really don't think the offense will be that great. They brought in Boise State transfer Taylon Green to replace KJ Jefferson, and they brought in Utah transfer running back Quinton Jackson, which should improve a run game which was essentially non-existent a season ago. But the offensive line is still really bad for Arkansas, and it'll be a big reason the offense isn't that good. The defense should be decent, as they've been slightly improving over the past couple seasons. I think Arkansas will be okay. I've got them going 4-8, 1-7 in the SEC. Wins over Arkansas, Pine Bluff, UAB, Mississippi State, and Louisiana Tech. 13th in the SEC, I've got South Carolina. So South Carolina's in a similar position to Arkansas, where they were good a couple years ago. In South Carolina's case, 2022, where they went 8-5. But last year they went just 5-7 and didn't make a bowl game. Offensively, South Carolina lost several key players, such as quarterback Spencer Rattler, leading rusher Mario Anderson, star receiver Xavier Legette, and their other receiver Juice Wells. Lenora Sellers is set to take over at quarterback, but he is very inexperienced. South Carolina did bring in a talented running back, Raheem Sanders from Arkansas, who should be quite good if he can stay on the field. And South Carolina also brought in a few key transfers at the receiver position to help replace Legette and Wells. But the offensive line is another major concern on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they brought in some talented transfers who should help the defense, and overall the defense will be solid. But South Carolina plays a pretty difficult schedule playing in the SEC without playing the hardest possible schedule they can play, playing in a tough conference. I've got them going 4-8, 1-7 in the SEC. Wins over Akron, Vanderbilt, Wofford, and Old Dominion. Number 12, we've got Auburn. So Auburn enters year 2 under Hugh Freeze after a 6-win campaign in year 1. Offensively, they should be good, but a lot rests on the shoulders of quarterback Peyton Thorne, who was very shaky last season. Jarquez Hunter is back after having 900 yards last year, and is one of the better running backs in the conference. Plus, Auburn brought in Penn State receiver Keandre Lambert-Smith, who had 673 yards last season. Plus, the offensive line could be good, returning 3 starters. But Auburn's got the potential offensively, but my big concern is Peyton Thorne, as he's always been quite turnover prone. The Auburn defense should be pretty good after a good year last year, and they returned 5 starters, but I do have concerns about them having 4 new starters in the secondary. But Auburn has potential for a good season. I've got them going 6-6 for the second straight season, and the 2-6 in the SEC, wins over Alabama A&M, Cal, New Mexico, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and UL Monroe. Number 11 in the SEC is Kentucky. So Kentucky is a team that should be solid, but I don't think they'll be anything too great. Offensively, they brought in Georgia transfer and former 5-star quarterback Brock Vandagriff, so there's a lot of potential there. But at running back, they lost 1,000-yard rusher Ray Davis, but they brought in Ohio State transfer Chip Trayanum as one of the players to try to fill his shoes. Kentucky has a pair of good receivers and an offensive line that returns 4 starters, so the offense has potential, especially if Vandagriff can be a good quarterback. Now, the defense was quite bad for Kentucky last year. They returned some key players and brought in some transfer portal pieces that could help the defense take a step forward. Kentucky's got some potential, and I think they'll have a decent season. They'll go 7-5, 3-5 in the SEC, losses to Georgia, Ole Miss, Florida, Tennessee, and Texas. Number 10 is Florida, and this is a big year for Florida head coach Billy Napier, as he's gone 6-7 and 5-7 in his first 2 seasons as the Gators head coach. Offensively, Florida returns quarterback Graham Mertz, who was actually really good in his first season with the team. And Florida also returns running back Montrell Johnson, as well as receiver Eugene Wilson. The offensive line returns 3 starters, and this could be a pretty good Florida offense. The big weakness for Florida is the defense, where they were very bad last year, and I don't see them having much improvement this season. Florida will be a solid team. They play one of the hardest schedules in the country with 8 preseason top 25 teams on the schedule. I've got them going 5-7, 3-5 in the SEC. Wins over Samford, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, UCF, and Kentucky. Number 9 in the SEC is Oklahoma. So Oklahoma enters their first season as a member of the SEC, and I think they're a good team, but definitely not a team that competes for an SEC championship. Offensively, Oklahoma lost quarterback Dillon Gabriel, but then we now turn to former 5-star quarterback at Jackson Arnold. They have a good receiver duo of Deion Burks and Nick Anderson, but the offensive line is a major question for the Sooners, needing to replace all 5 starters from a season ago. So I think the offensive line could hold back what otherwise should be a pretty good offense. Now, the Oklahoma defense was okay last year, and they returned 6 starters, and that is a good foundation for improvement this season. Oklahoma plays a pretty tough schedule, actually a really tough schedule. They'll be a good team, but won't quite have the greatest record because of a really difficult schedule. I've got them 7-5, 3-5 in the SEC. Losses to Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama, and LSU. Number 8 in the SEC is Texas A&M. So Texas A&M is entering their first season under new head coach Mike Elko, who's a great head coach and a home run hire by Texas A&M. The Aggies' offense is led by quarterback Connor Wegman, who's returning from a leg injury which cost him most of last season. Running back Reuben Owens and wide receiver Moose Muhammad both give Connor Wegman some good targets on the outside and just playmakers around him. And defensively, I'm expecting Texas A&M to be pretty good. Mike Elko is a defensive-minded head coach, and he will definitely help. But this defense doesn't lack talent. They were pretty good last year, and now I think with Mike Elko coming in, this is going to be even better defense. Will definitely be the strength of this team. Texas A&M will have a solid season, make a bowl game at 7-5. They'll go 4-4 in conference play. Losses against Notre Dame, Florida, Missouri, LSU, and Texas. Number 7, we've got LSU. So LSU is coming off back-to-back 10-win seasons, but I think it could be difficult for them to get to that mark again this season. As last season, offensively, they had the number 1 scoring offense in the country, but they lost several key contributors to that offense, including offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock. But Heisman-winning quarterback Jaden Daniels and wide receivers Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas Jr. are all in the NFL, and that leaves LSU with some big shoes to fill at those positions. LSU will turn to Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback, and they still have a great group of receivers with Kyron Lacey, Chris Hilton, and Aaron Anderson. Plus, they have a good tight end in Mason Taylor. Now, the offensive line will be great for LSU and one of the best in the country, but the defense is a question, as the LSU defense was atrocious last season. They have some good players like Harold Perkins and Major Burns, but outside of those two, it's not looking too great. I think the defense will hold this team back. I think LSU will get to 10 games, 10 wins. They'll go 6-2 in conference play, losses to Ole Miss and Alabama. Number 6 in the conference is Tennessee. So Tennessee went 9-4, which was a slight step back from what they did in 2022. But they should be pretty good again this season. Offensively, they're led by 5-star quarterback Nico Iamaleava. Probably said that wrong. But Tennessee has a great receiving corps led by receivers Squirrel White and Drew McCoy, as the two combined for over 1,000 receiving yards last season. The run game is going to take a hit with star running back Jalen Wright off to the NFL, but they still have running back Dylan Sampson, who should have a big year now being the unquestioned number 1 back. And Tennessee has a great offensive line. Now, defensively, they were great last season and should be good again, led by star edge rusher James Pierce Jr., who's arguably the best player in the country. But Tennessee is going to have a good season. This is a team that could make it back to the college football playoff, but I've got them going 10-2, 6-2 in conference play, losses to Alabama and Georgia. Number 5 in the conference is Missouri. So they're coming off an extremely surprising season where they went 11-2 last year. And I'm expecting another good year from the Missouri Tigers, as they returned most of their key players. Quarterback Brady Cook is back, and he's got one of the best receivers in the country to throw to Luther Burden, plus T.O. Weiss is another good player. Several other receivers I didn't name are also on the roster. Now, running back Cody Schrader is no longer on the team, but they brought in a pair of transfers to help the running back room, and the offensive line should also be pretty good. The Missouri defense might take a slight step back, especially after losing some key players in the secondary, but the defense should still be solid, and Missouri will have a good season. I've got them 11-1, 7-1 in the SEC. Their only loss comes against Alabama, and considering they play in the SEC, they play a really easy schedule. Number 4 in the SEC is Alabama. So Alabama enters their first season under Kalen DeBoer, and this will be their first season since 2006 where Nick Saban will not be their head coach. But Kalen DeBoer is a great hire for Alabama, and I still think they will be a great team. Offensively, quarterback Jalen Milroe returns, and he should have a good season, although he can still improve as a passer. The running backs should be good, as the duo of Jan Miller and Justice Haynes should be a good 1-2 punch at running back. And the receivers are a big question, as Alabama lost their top 3 pass catchers from last season, and their leading receiver who's returning to this season's team is Kobe Prentice, who had just 314 yards. The Alabama defense, which had always been good under Nick Saban, is a concern after losing several talented players like Dallas Turner, Caleb Downs, Terrion Arnold, and Kool-Aid McKinstry. So that brings a question for Alabama on the defensive side of the ball. But Alabama is still Alabama. They're going to be pretty good. They'll go 11-1, 7-1 in the SEC. Their lone loss comes to Georgia, which is actually their first SEC game without Nick Saban. Third in the SEC, we've got Ole Miss. So Ole Miss is a team that has extremely high expectations for this season, and that's for good reason, as this is a really good Ole Miss team. Offensively, they've returned quarterback Jackson Dart, and he has a ton of talent around him. They lost star running back Quashon Judkins, but they still have Ulysses Bentley and added LSU transfer Logan Diggs. Receivers Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins are back, plus they brought in South Carolina transfer receiver Juice Wells, and the offensive line should also be quite good. The Ole Miss defense is loaded with transfers, but I'm expecting this to be a pretty good Ole Miss defense, which is going to make this team a serious contender in the SEC, and for the college football playoff, as that's what Ole Miss has been missing in previous seasons. A good defense, and I think they're going to have a good enough defense this year. Ole Miss will have a great year, 11-1, 7-1 in conference play, only lost to Georgia. Speaking of Georgia, I've got them second in the conference. They missed out on their chance for a three-peat last season, but they're still a great team. They were a great team last year, and they're one of the best teams in the country again this year. They returned star quarterback Carson Beck, added Florida transfer Trevor Etienne at running back, and the receiver room is great, consisting of players like Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett. Plus, Georgia's offensive line is quite good. Defensively for Georgia, they've been outstanding over the past few seasons, and I'm expecting their defense to be one of the best in the country once again. I've got Georgia second in the SEC for one reason: they're going to lose at Texas. I've got them 11-1 overall, 7-1 in the SEC. As I said, their one loss comes at Texas. Number 1 in the SEC is Texas. In their first year in the SEC, I think they're going to be the best regular season team. Offensively, quarterback Quinn Ewers is one of the best players in the country. Now, Texas did lose some key players from last year's team, such as running back Jonathan Brooks, and their other star running back, sophomore CJ Baxter, is out for the year with a knee injury. So running back is a little bit of a question, with Jadon Blue being the only player who's really played at all. But receiver, they lost some key players like Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell, but they brought in some great pass catchers at receiver, such as Cyrus Bolden, Matthew Bolden, and Isaiah Bond, as well as Alabama transfer tight end Amari Neblack. The offensive line should also be really good with 4 returning starters, and defensively, Texas should be quite good again after they only really lost 2 key contributors in defensive tackle T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. But Texas should have a great defense, and they're a great overall team. They'll go 12-0 in their first season as a member of the SEC. And in the SEC championship game, Georgia against Texas, rematch the first time they played. I had Texas because that game was in Texas. The SEC championship game is in Atlanta, which is practically a home game for Georgia. It'd be silly to not pick them to win in their backyard. I'll take Georgia to get revenge and win the SEC title. And real quick, before we get to my college football playoff predictions, my winner of the Heisman Trophy is Georgia quarterback Carson Beck. But getting to my college football playoff predictions, and first going over where I think each team will be seated. And remember, the top 4 have to be conference champions. So number 1, I've got the 12-1 SEC champion Georgia. Number 2 is the 12-1 Big Ten champion Ohio State. Number 3 is the 12-1 Big 12 champion Utah. And number 4 is the 12-1 ACC champion Florida State. So now we're going to get into the at-large teams and the group of 5 team. The at-large team, number 5, it's Notre Dame. There's no way they're going 12-0 and not being the highest ranked at-large team. Number 6 is Texas, a 12-1 SEC runner-up. 7 is Oregon, same situation as Texas, 12-1, this time Big Ten runner-up. Kansas State, I've got at number 8, but they could be a little lower with a couple SEC teams behind them. But Kansas State, 12-1, Big 12 runner-up at number 8. 9th, I've got Alabama at 11-1. Ole Miss is 10th at 11-1. 11th is another 11-1 team, and it comes down to an 11-1 Missouri or Penn State. Even though both teams play pretty easy schedules, I'll give it to Missouri. And number 12 is going to be the highest-ranked Group of 5 champion. Really don't know that much about these Group of 5 teams, but Memphis is a pretty good Group of 5 team. I'll take them. But now, getting into the playoffs, remember, the top 4 teams get a bye. So, first we've got 12-seeded Memphis taking on 5-seeded Notre Dame. I'm going to take Notre Dame to move on. Much better overall. Offensively, defensively, shouldn't even be that close. And real quick, remember these round 1 games are on college campuses, so the higher seed will be at home. Next game, we've got 11-seeded Missouri against 6-seeded Texas. 2 SEC opponents. I'll take Texas to move on. 10-seeded Ole Miss against 7-seed Oregon. This is tough, but I'm going to take Oregon to move on. And 8-seeded Kansas State hosting 9-seeded Alabama. I'll take Alabama to move on. I just think they're the more talented team. Now, the second round of the college football playoff, these are the bowl games. So these will all be played at neutral site. First, we've got Notre Dame against Florida State. That's the 4 against the 5. Notre Dame has already beaten Florida State once. That was at Notre Dame. Florida State's only going to go as far as DJ Uiagalelei can take them. That's going to end here in the quarterfinals, and Notre Dame will move on. Georgia and Alabama. This is going to be tough. I had Georgia in the regular season. I'll take the same result. Utah against Texas. I think this is going to be Texas. I think they can outscore Utah. They're the more talented team. Texas will move on. And the final matchup is interesting. Ohio State against Oregon. The third time I have these teams meeting in this season. Obviously, they meet in the regular season, likely to play in the Big Ten championship game, and now they could meet again in the playoff. I have that happening, and I've got them splitting the first two, so in the third matchup, I mean, you can honestly flip a coin for me, but I've got Oregon. In the semifinals, we've got Georgia against Notre Dame. I'd love to pick Notre Dame here to move on, but I'm going to take Georgia. And then Oregon, Texas, another game nearly impossible for me to pick, but give me Texas. And in the national championship game, Georgia against Texas, for the third time. They split the first two games, very similar to Ohio State and Oregon. But this Georgia against Texas matchup is extremely tough to predict. This is actually going to be the second time they're going to be playing in Atlanta, as this national championship game will be played in the same building as the SEC championship game. It's a coin flip for the national championship, but I think Georgia is the best team in the country. They're going to win their third national championship in the last 4 years. So, that is how I think the entire 2024 college football season will play out. This video took me forever to work on. This is definitely the longest video I have ever done. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. It would mean a lot after putting all this time and effort into this video. And if you're a college football fan, I've got a lot more college football content on the way. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. But let me know in the comments who you think will win the national championship this college football season. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.